Well, hi everyone. I'm Daisy McGowan. I'm the director of GOCA, the Galleries of Contemporary Art at UCCS, and this is an installment of our virtual studio visit series. We are very lucky to have with us today Sean O'Malley. Sean, thank you so much for taking some time to share some insights in your studio and taking time out of your day.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, Daisy. I appreciate this. I know you've done this for a handful of artists, and I think it's just a wonderful use of what you can do and who you can connect with to help artists and keep the community connected and keep the voices circulating. So thank you very much.
Well, that's really good to hear. That was definitely a lot of our hope with this series. We shifted very quickly to think about what we could do to support artists during this time and to continue some of our program, our mission, which is to bring outstanding art and artists to our community and to also offer artists a resource and a platform and a space. We've been very fortunate to have your work on exhibition at GOCA multiple times. Actually, you've been a big part of GOCA's history. We're marking our 40th year. Yeah, actually, maybe I should pull up my virtual 40-year background here, and you can see our special 40-year logo we made. Oops, wrong way. There I am, loading in my virtual gallery. So yeah,
Cool.
the gallery was founded in 1980, and not that long after. What year did you end up arriving in Colorado Springs? 1990?
It was 77.
Oh gosh, a little earlier.
I moved to town permanently, and then I think, when was it? Shortly after that, I went to school. I enrolled at UCCS and then dropped out.
Okay.
But then came back to teach there I taught there for 9 years. I'm trying to remember the dates. I think I finished in 96 or 2006.
Right.
I really don't remember anymore.
That's okay. That's the part. That's the time frame I was referencing. Is really kind of the 90s when Jerry Riggs was the director of the galleries and the art department. Actually, I think that was before our visual and performing arts department, as it is now, was formed. But there was some really wonderful faculty there, and you were part of the art community here. And I'll have you share a little more about your background and your biography here in a minute. But you've been a really big part of GOCA over the years, and one of the exhibitions that's my favorite from the 10 years now, it's kind of crazy to think I've been here 10 years, this summer it'll be 10 years, was an exhibition, thank you, called Play, with a UCCS alumnus, Jason Chase, and I still, one of my favorite shows. But you're always pushing it. You're always doing really interesting work. And when we talked about this, what could we do for the virtual studio visit? It's not the same as a real studio visit. The wonderful thing about my job as a curator of contemporary art is I keep a pretty ambitious pace of studio visits throughout the year. A couple of years ago, I think I topped 200 in a year. And those are in Colorado, a lot of them, but then also out of state, international, if I can swing it. It's just really kind of what it takes to stay on top of contemporary art. There's always so much happening. But, there's just this wonderful sort of, having done so many studio visits, I can say there's one thing that's always consistent, which is this wonderful point of intimacy of the artist sharing a space that is a working space. And that's what you pulled up here on the screen. We have an image of your workspace, which I've had the privilege of visiting a few times, I think. And it's a wonderful workspace. If you're a sculptor, you sort of drool over your setup. And it's there at your home, right? But in the back kind of cottage. But also the other part of it that's sort of vulnerable, and what's a bit of a shift for this series is we don't normally invite an audience in and bring cameras in. It can make it feel a little different, obviously. And so first of all, I want to say thank you for being willing to share. And I asked you specifically to share a little bit about your process. So we'll go into that here in a bit and get to see your process, which I think is quite fascinating. But if you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started there.
Sure. I'm from New Orleans, and grew up there, went to school there, um, migrated upstream and uphill and inland in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, and have been here ever since. Raised a family. Um, Spend most of that time in this very house. And right now we're in an indoor studio space I have in the basement. And I also have as you say, a very nice studio 50 feet outside my back door into this other building, where I have the entire first floor. The second floor is an apartment that we keep rented. So I get a little rental income, which helps if you're an artist to have very low overhead because it's a funny business. It's barely a business at all by definition.
Right.
But I feel very fortunate that I can do this. I've been doing it a long time. I was a student at the LSU extension in New Orleans. It's called LSUNO. And that's where I started to major in art. And then I went to school for, I don't know, I think 6 years. I never graduated. But I was really eager to learn a lot of things. Changed my major a couple of times. Anyway, I dropped out of school, and then I went for about 17 years without doing any kind of art. When I moved up here, I went to work in a furniture factory, a very small furniture factory, because I wanted to learn wood joinery. I really like the medium of wood. I like it for a number of reasons. But I know that there's a lot of history of people working with wood. And so I studied a lot of that, largely self-taught. And now I almost exclusively use wood now. I do other things and other materials depending on what the circumstances are. For instance, outdoor sculpture has to be something instead of wood, because wood is always expanding, contracting. It's responding to its surroundings all the time, which causes movement in the wood. It shrinks in dry periods, and then it expands in moist periods. It's also an economical material, and it's renewable. So I really like those things. I like the human tactile quality of it. And then let's see. So I did this work in a furniture factory here, where I had access to all kinds of tools, and on the weekends and after work. And I just continued my self-education that way. But then that business went under, and I had to rely on art for income. I mean, for the first time after leaving the university. And so I tried to pick up some freelance work. I worked for Michael Garman Galleries here in town. I freelanced for a company called Current, which was a mail order catalog company that had they had a big artist staff, and they generated their own artwork for cards and figurines. And they needed somebody who had 3D capabilities. And so I was doing freelance for them, creating Christmas ornaments and things like that. But then I met somebody in all of that. I met a person who was a toy inventor, a marketer guy from New York who happened to be in town. And I arranged a meeting with him, and I showed him an idea for a toy that I had cooking with some other people. And And he didn't like the idea, but he said he was looking for somebody to team up with him who could illustrate and engineer and sculpt um, toy concepts, which he wanted to pitch to the large manufacturers of the toy companies like Fisher Price and Mattel and Hasbro and things like that. This was we started teaming up in 1987. And we continued working together for 10 years on creating toy storyboards and models and stuff to pitch these toy concepts to the companies. We never really succeeded in the way that we had wanted to. He wanted to get very rich. I wanted to have a stable financial situation. He kind of paid me an advance against royalties during that time. But more or less, we ended up writing off the whole thing after 10 years. After 10 years of trying and failing, failure was the norm. Rejection was the norm for those ideas. But every once in a while, something would get into the market. And I think we kind of broke even. It was his investment. Broke even. But anyway, that's a roundabout way of saying why I might use these funny shapes and colors.
Yeah, I appreciate, looking at this image of this work you've got here in your studio, which I think I've gotten to see this one in person. I'm thinking, first you talked about wood, and you probably get asked that a lot, why work with wood, because and we'll go through this with some of the process photos you have, which are so great to see. You take wood to a place where, it's hard to understand that it's wood still. So it's helpful to hear, I think I hear in that, what you talked about, that for you, working with wood is so natural at this point, and it's your preferred medium to work with. And so sometimes when people say, why work with that? It's not necessarily about the material shining through at the end. It's the fact that how to how it behaves, and there's maybe even a pleasure in working with it for you that makes it, and it's also economical, which is a really valuable point. People might always ask you, why don't you fabricate this out of plastics or something? And maybe there's no political reason why you don't want to work with plastic. Maybe it's just purely, the material. And I think that's fine, but it's also fair to say, as an artist, it's economical, and there's a level of knowledge of the material and intimacy with it, that makes you have maybe more quote unquote successful results. But the other thing that was really interesting is you're talking about, working as attempting to put toys out in the world, but also working for current. And I didn't know you worked for Magic Town. Is that what they call Michael Garman Studios?
Oh, Michael Garman's Magic Town. That's
some crazy stories. Yeah, I know some people that worked there when they were growing up here, and some wild stories about that place. It's kind of fascinating. I think it still exists, right?
I think so. He's supposed to have died, but then he fought off death and stuff.
Wow.
I don't know. It must still be going. I think his son runs it now.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. But at any rate, I love hearing all that history, because I kind of see it all in this work. And one thing that, you're very humble, I think. You have a skill set that's, your technical craft is so high, but with all these sort of twists and turns with your education, like you called it, your self-education, I don't know, I see it all right here in this piece we're looking at, because in some ways it's a toy, but it's not, right? It's a sculpture. And so you're playing with that line of, it really draws people in. I think your work does that very generally. It has a wonderful way with color and the texture. You want to touch it, or, you're curious about it. And then I love how you draw people in, and you often have a pretty punchy concept, that you're taking on. Some of your works are like really intensely, dealing with politics or a take on current affairs. But then a lot of your work is just playful for the sake of being playful. And so, I don't know, it's wonderful to hear you talk about your biography.
Well, thank you. It's I guess it's a little unusual, not typical. It's fun to share.
I think the typical in art and with artists, because I'm endlessly fascinated by how artists make it a go of it, is there is no typical, and I think we often have this idea of like, oh, this is the way you do things. And certainly in academic world. You know, there's like, oh, you have to have this degree to do this, and there's a hierarchy, right? But actually, as an artist, you're like kind of upending the whole hierarchy, and because you're taking that big risk of having to figure out a path as an artist on your own. And there's always that hustle, you know. But now you're at a point in your career where you've gotten quite a lot of attention, very well deserved. Sounds like you have a big show coming up at the Sangre de Cristo Art Center in Pueblo. It's been postponed to August, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. Are you making a lot of new work for that show, or kind of a mix, or what's
It'll be almost all new work. I want to say there'll be over 100 new pieces.
Wow.
Some of those being small, and then, but some of them being pretty big.
That's exciting. That's a big gallery. I mean, I'm not sure which gallery you're in, but they tend to have large galleries there.
I'm in the Hogue Gallery, which is you go down the stairs into. I've had 2 other shows there. It's a big space. Yeah. It really is. And I tend to. One of the reasons I use wood is and can work it quickly is because I have so many ideas I want to get out. So given the opportunity to have a show in that big space, I really want to fill it with stuff. But, you know.
Oh, I think we froze a minute there. Hang on 1 second.
I'll see what time will tell a clear, short thesis or what I'm doing, and sort of push the envelope in a couple of areas, and then allow all of the pieces in the room to kind of relate and challenge one another, or add to a long sentence or something.
We had a little freezing there, and I just want to acknowledge the fact that we're just doing this over Zoom, and there's not heavy editing involved in these, and they're definitely very low tech. But you were saying you were talking about kind of the concept for the show, or it sounds to me like it's a really generative opportunity to make a lot of work. And I was thinking, do you use that opportunity, you know, when you have an exhibition and a space like that, to sort of if you don't have a big concept that you're working with, to send it play and just generate a lot of concepts quickly, like you said, with wood?
Well, yes, it's kind of the way it plays, or that's how I play with it. And play is a good terminology, I think, a good term, because it's kind of a process of exploring. And when I do get the idea of making one thing, I think of something that contrasts that or extends that idea or something. And so that leads to another thing. And kind of like the sculpture on the screen, there are, you know, if I'm in the middle, you know, I'm going in all different directions. I have thoughts on everything, right? I'm living a 360-degree existence. And so my perceptions and my thoughts go with me, and or my thinking ability to think goes with me in that entire realm. You know, 360 degrees, but I mean, you know, fully 3-dimensional.
That's probably a good point to jump into sharing some of your process. That's one of the great things about these studio visits, is get a chance to see, you know, as a curator, when I get to go into a studio, I get to see work in process, and it's not normally something you would show in a gallery. I've seen a couple gallery shows that deal with process, but for the most part, artists don't typically focus in that area unless, you know, it's a really big concept for them. I'm wondering, you know, if you could take us through kind of from concept, you know, and I love your metaphor here with this work that we've got up on the screen. Is really, you're probably just filtering all these inputs all the time and sort of pivoting and taking ideas. And then when you get an idea, do you want to walk us through sort of?
Sure. Sure. I have some things up here I'll pull up. Okay. And this is a commission. I'm going to open this up a little wider if I can. Nope, that's not doing it.
There you go.
Does that help?
Yep.
Okay.
That's great.
So somebody saw a piece of mine and was interested in commissioning something. I sent her to my website and she found something she liked. And I said, well, I could revisit the idea, but it would be different. So she said, that's great. And so I drew this up based on a previous work. And then when she said yes, I started going at it. And I took this path. This is kind of typical. I start out with pencil and paper. I do a lot of doodles, actually, in a small scale, and I just play. But when I decide to make something, I might draw it up big so that I can, as you can see here in the next image, and this is the original sculpture that this woman saw. But then if I draw it out big in this actual size, I can plot out where I'm going to cut it out in the wood. And I do this, I adapt the idea to the tools I have and to the wood I have. It goes like this. So it actually starts out as a two-dimensional idea, beginning, because it's pencil and paper, and I'm working with something that has sort of a graphic appeal to it, which is very useful in a digital world too for images. And then I go through the process of shaping these things. So there's a lot of handwork and finishing. Here I've assembled the pieces, or I'm in the process. So I'm composing kind of in space a little bit. Part of it's 2D, part of it, as it becomes three-dimensional, then I've actually visited in the round. It has to hold itself up. It have to be able to make it. It has to survive the making. And let's see, I think here I've got all the pieces together. Planning then for how I paint it. So you can see there are a lot of steel pins and bits of hardware that hold all this together. And then the finished product was this. And this is oak. It's been wire wheeled to kind of bring out the grain. That grain then holds, it's kind of like an intaglio printing process. The wood, the deep areas of the grain hold some of the paint. I can rub a lot of the surface paint off and get this kind of an effect. Success.
Yeah, the commission process is interesting too, right? Because I heard you saying that, she found something she liked, but I didn't hear you say, and I replicated it to the T, and I think that's important point. As an artist myself, I've been asked to do commissions, and I say, well, I'm still interested in this series, so I'll make you something in the series, but it's definitely going to be its own thing. And can you talk a little bit about, this idea of the sort of energy of the original versus making copies? Because you're not a production artist, you're not producing multiples, you're producing singular works.
It's true. It's true. When I was in art school at the university, I was actually smarter then, and I said, well, I'm not going to sell the originals. I'm going to study printmaking and sculpture casting, and those were my majors. But now, after that 17-year hiatus, now I'm making unique things out of wood, and I don't have a computer-aided machining method that can replicate things. I have to make these things one at a time out of lumps of wood. Every piece of wood is different. Every day of the week is different. My drawing line might be different. My response to colors and shapes changes. But so I'm making unique things one at a time by hand.
Yeah.
And I've justified that, um, that I say I reserve the right to revisit ideas. So I will sell somebody an original, and it'll be signed with the month and the year I made it. But because this isn't a copy, it isn't, it's a unique thing, I reserve the right to revisit the idea. And because I know when I go do that, it's going to be a different thing. And I'll make sure it's different. I mean, I'm never going to make something exactly the same. I have another series of light bulbs that have been popular, where I carve a light bulb, a piece of wood to look just like a light bulb, but the light bulb's been stabbed into the wall, against, stuck to the wall by something piercing the light bulb, holding it to the wall. But
yeah, I love that series because there's a combination both of, I know you're working with wood, but you make a lot of things that look like they're filled with air or made out of different materials, but then you're further twisting it and playing with this idea that you could puncture, or twist a light bulb like it's a rubber, toy or something. Yeah, it's a lovely combination, and that sort of twist or juxtaposition that you were talking about earlier.
yeah. Well, it's a play space. When you're making something out of wood that isn't normally wood, then you can, at that point, you can really manipulate it. You can slice it in half and open it up and look inside. And then what might be inside might not be the thing that you expect. It could be anything you want, because it's wide open. It's playland. It's whatever I might imagine, or anybody could do it.
Yeah, could you show us one of those?
Yeah. Let's see. So these, you can see my cursor, right?
Yep.
Okay, so here's photographs of some previous ones. And this is, I think, a pattern piece that I use. But I had a commission to do 10 of these, all with different stabbers. I call them stabbers. The original stabber was a bent nail, and then it progressed to, over the years, it became a broken pencil. But I'm more or less repeating that process with the first commission piece I showed you, where I have a kind of a planar view, a view from above and a view from the side and a view from the ends, and I can kind of go about the process of making by understanding things in this three-dimensional language of side elevation, plan view, and end view. And it helps me to get through the tools. A lot of the tools are set up with flat areas and linear processes and perpendiculars and parallels.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a series of things. And there's really a lot of handwork involved in this, a lot of nuance in getting these things to look like, nope, that's not it. There it is. I want to, many layers of paint. I have to figure out how I'm going to hold it so I can spray it. I can't set it down.
Because it's got to be painted in the round, right?
Yes. And I usually use Krylon aerosol. So these are the stabbers in process. And I forget where these ended up, but here's a pencil, which is a narrative. Again, playing with that idea of, well, I like to play with something that is recognizable, but there's something a little bit off. And so it forces an engagement, because what I'm presenting isn't really easily resolved. I mean, I'm kind of forcing people to um, I
They,
don't know,
yeah, they
consider
have
a
to
new
resolve,
reality.
they have to resolve what they're looking at. And it's almost not important that the work is made out of wood. That's important to you. But as they get closer to it, they might wonder, oh, is that a real toothbrush? Wait, there's a little something off about it. This idea of sort of uh, um, trompe l'oeil, tricking the eye, right? And and then there's probably a lot of laughter that comes out with these, uh, and that's such an interesting response for art, because it's a point where maybe a viewer is like a little bit taken off their point of departure of, I'm in an art gallery, I'm looking at art, I have this expectation, and you're twisting that, and a little bit pulling the rug out from under them, but in a really um, it's not an aggressive way. But these, anyways, it's there's a lightheartedness to it, and then of course there's just probably a lot of wonder at your mastery of the craft. It's interesting to hear that you trained as a printmaker and work with mold making, because I see you set up a lot of processes, but then you take it in a different direction where it gives you kind of the freedom to play with variations and really just puzzle through solutions. And I think you really, that comes through in the work. I think it invites people when they see the work to think through, oh, maybe I made some assumptions about things, but what if what if I took a different view on this, or shifted my thinking? And I think there's a lot of power in that with your work in particular.
Oh, well, good. I like that might happen. I'm being playful with my own mind, and it's a toy, and I take that sort of approach to whoever might view something too, is that they, just like with the toys, like creating something for a child to interact with. Well, the first person that responds to a toy is the mom. The mom has to. Traditionally, mothers have make the choices, the decisions, and the expenditures on what kind of toys end up on the floor for the child. So, it's a multi-layered audience, and
Yeah.
I really liked being able to communicate and try to make things that are accessible to any person who walks up. I do that over and over again. I sort of feel like, and then I also think that the moral justification for it is that I'm stimulating a part of the brain that says, oh, as you were just saying, oh, this person has to kind of rearrange the furniture in their head a little bit. Because I know just being human, the brain, the mind sort of settles into patterns and expectations. And if I can come in and surprise myself, get delight from it, get a nice reminder that, oh, there's a lot of opportunity in the world. I'm not stuck in a rut. I think that has value.
But you've also taken it into some interesting directions, like when you had the exhibition at GOCA about 5 years ago, you had a full wall of guns, right? And they're toy guns. But they were very much talking about the school shooting crisis that was happening, that continues to be a crisis. And so you're able to take some really heavy topics that are controversial, and it doesn't seem to me like you're necessarily presenting one side or the other, because you do leave a pretty open-ended, and like you said, you bring people, you kind of draw the viewer in with this playfulness, and your surfaces are always really interesting. They're either this very sort of seductive, polished, painted surface, or some of like the gum. I have one of your gum paintings, and it's literally chewed up gum. I mean, it's there's a lot of like humor in that, but you've got always something that sort of draws somebody in. And then when there's sort of a conceptual punch there, that's a really potent mix as well. But you don't necessarily do that with every piece. Some of your work is really about the sort of generative creativity that, you know, goes into being an artist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, I have an active mind, and I like that. I like that. It's a great sort of a friend. And in the times of isolation, which a lot of artists have, it's a fun thing to play with. But it also at times needs a rest. So sometimes you know, I can have these loaded messages or topics that I'm playing with, and maybe there's a message in there or something, and it gets very heavy. But also it's at times it's nice to just have something just monochrome, just about form. It's very another pleasing thing. And yeah, definitely I do that. Sure.
Yeah, I think thinking of why not just reproduce these, or find, you know, a way to, oh, you can speed up your process. And you obviously have developed you have to develop systems, but it seems like you almost have to figure out problem solving for each series or body or new work kind of on its own, which is probably keeps you interested, I would guess, if your mind's really active too. Whereas if you set up like, oh, here's my process and I can just churn these out, you know. There's a really great essay I think about a lot by Walter Benjamin about art in it's called The Work of Art in the Age of its Technological Reproducibility. So why make work that is so hand, you know, turned, handcrafted? And you could just make this, and I'm sure people ask you this all the time, you know, why not just make it out of mass produce and oh, just make it on a computer and somebody else could produce it for you. And I'm not discounting artists that do that necessarily, but Benjamin talked about this idea of the aura of something, and then once there's a copy of it, it loses, you know. And even looking at this on a screen versus in person, there's definitely, you know, we've lost some of that lost in translation as far as aura of the piece. And having spent a lot of time with your work in person, you know, I think it's such an important part of the work. Can you talk a little bit about that concept, or how you see that within your work and your practice?
Yes. I think, you know, I think that's a real thing. The idea about, you know, that object that was handmade. If I just wanted to fill, you know, people's homes with plastic, which was the intent, I guess, when I was in the toy business, I could take that route, but I'm not really that interested in getting rich or making a lot of money. I try to ask for a fair wage on these things, but the other thing is there's a quality of realness, of the actuality of the thing in it. You know, these things, even in my process, you know, that aura, maybe, I don't know what all defines that, or why and when it happens, but I spend a lot of time on these objects, and my painting techniques, there's a lot of burnishing, you know, there's a lot of rubbing. I'm working kind of in this space. Most of these objects are this size, or the light bulbs are this big. And so there's really a lot of personal time, in a little spit and maybe some blood. And so these things really, I think of them as characters, you know, not, or, you know, or as individuals. And that's important to me. I mean, it just makes it more real. I remember hearing a story about a group of blind children being escorted through the Smithsonian Institution. And the tour guide, the docent had the students all come into this big room and was telling them this was the aviation display at the Smithsonian. And the docent said to the students, and right above your head is the actual plane that Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic Ocean in. And they go, oh, wow. But one child asks a question, so is that the real plane or a model of the real plane? And the docent said, no, it's the real plane. So why was that important?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, we're trying to live, you know, genuine lives, you know, real lives. And you can do that via a plastic mold and a distant manufacturer and a shipping container. And, you know, you can live a real life that way, but if you can touch the object, I mean, if you could hold the Rembrandt in your hand, if you could rub the surface of a Van Gogh, you know, if you could kind of imagine, you know, you rub your hands on those brush strokes,
Mm-hmm.
it's something else. I had an experience with a Van Gogh at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I was able to stand right in front of Starry Night.
Wow.
I was about this close to it, this close. And without the alarms going off, I was leaning in, and I noticed that the painting it's painted on a very coarse fabric, linen, like a brown linen fabric. And it's so coarse in the way he used this impasto style of painting. You can actually look through the painting and see the wall behind it.
Wow.
I didn't know that. I didn't see that from an image. How many times have I seen that image? So, you know, I thought that was, you know, genuine and real. And I was having, for myself, a unique experience. I don't know. It's just something I valued. And now I'm making these things all unique, one at a time, the slow way.
What I hear in all of that is you're inviting us to really slow down and look, and that's something that artists do. I mean, when you're processing the world around you as an artist, you know, you're really observing, you're noticing, and I think a lot of people go through their day and their life not really noticing. And what you're sharing about the Van Gogh is, you know, you had a very slow and intimate experience with that work of art. And sure, we can see Van Gogh's Starry Night on a mug or, you know, on a poster online. It's just background on your desktop. And maybe you have, you know, there's definitely some of that aura there, right? That's why that work of art is so popular, because it has that. But what the experience you had with it took time and very intense focus, and really noticing the light in the space and the wall behind it. And, you know, you hope you just like walk through the day. And right now, with us being, you know, a lot of us being still working from home or being sort of self-quarantined or isolating, I feel like a lot of us have really slowed down. You know, I've done so many walks in my neighborhood. I've really noticed things that I didn't notice before, and gotten to know people that I just was too busy. I was moving too fast in my life to get to know. And obviously not, you know, up close, from a distance, but I've seen more of my neighbors across the street than I did for a long time being here. And it sort of makes me think about your work. I was thinking, well, why make it by hand? You know, there's like almost an absurdity to it's almost, it's like a political act, right? To say like, I'm going to take this, every level of this, and put this level of care into it. And yes, this ability to reproduce it en masse exists, and to have, you know, maybe a similar look, but there's value in that process, and there's value in that slowing down. And I think your work really invites people to consider that when they experience it in person.
I think of them as intimate objects.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in communicating at an intimate level. I'm very much about the body and touch. And the mind and the thinking process, and the emotions, you know, and the baggage that comes with every viewer, and the baggage I have. And I don't know, these things become like little touchstones, you know, points of contact, points of departure. So, you know, that's, to me, that's the value of an object, I think.
Well, it really comes through in the work, and I'm excited to see the show. And in the spirit of honesty, I'm going to get rid of my background here and go back to where I am, which is in a workspace studio garage here. Now my hair is not doing that weird thing. But I want to say thank you so much for just taking some time and sharing these insights into your work. It was wonderful to see your process. I don't think a lot of people get a chance to see that, so that's really special. And I hope people will go see the show in August or any of your upcoming, you know, showing your work and really understand it and see it with some new insights. That's my hope for this whole series.
Well, thank you very much. I can only be helpful what you're doing, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do this, to show and share, and hopefully in just some months of processing and figuring things out, we'll be able to do these sorts of things together in the same space.
Yes, we'll gather together again. We will. It'll when it's safe to do so. But for now, we'll be happy to have these points of connection. I certainly am, and I'm grateful for you and your time. And we'll share your website out as well. There's I know there's a lot of your previous work on there, and but nothing like seeing it in person, of course. So I look forward to that time. And I'm always excited to hear there's so much new work on the horizon. And I think out of this time, we're going to have a lot of interesting art in general coming out of this. So there's always some silver linings.
I'm sure we will.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.